Karen, do you want to do some housekeeping first of all? And I think the recording needs to start as well. Yes, it has.
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. I have started the recording, but if I could do some housekeeping first of all, please. This meeting is being live streamed and will be recorded for archive purposes. Except for members of the committee who wish to be on screen, would all present switch off their microphone and cameras until they're called by the chair to speak. Should you wish to speak, please would you raise your hand by using the raise your hand function in Teams. The chat function should be limited to use only if your raise your hand function or your audio functions do not work for any reason. The chair requests that all discussions relating to the agenda be voiced on screen in order for the viewing public to hear. Should you have any technical difficulties, as I've said earlier, please you can use the chat function if you get any difficulties, but otherwise would members please contact the Democratic Services Officer separately for assistance.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. I will now move on to the actual agenda itself. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I believe we have two, Councillor Cox and Councillor Thomas. I don't know if there's any more, Karen.
Councillor Thomas, you're right, correct, Chair. Councillor Thomas, however, has advised that he may join us later, but if not, can I please offer his apologies? And Councillor Crowley has advised that he will have to leave early, so he should be leaving just before 7:30.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the next item on the minutes of the meeting held on 22nd of September. Are you happy for me to sign them as a true record?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We now move on to any declarations of interest. Can't hear anyone with declaration of interest. Okay, that's fine. We're now moving. I think Carrie's going to present this report on revenue monitoring. Over to you, Carrie.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the revenue monitoring report for the period the 1st of April 2021 to the 31st of August 2021. And it outlines for you the position on the revenue account for that period. Also takes into account and reporting to you the ongoing impact that the pandemic is having on the council's finances. So it continues to be a challenging year for us due to the ongoing financial implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's impacting us as it did last year, really, in relation to our level of spend and also in relation to lost income. Welsh Government has now confirmed that funding will be available to cover these costs to the end of this financial year. Although the level of funding available is going to change for some services. In particular, we are seeing a tapering off of some of the support for the social care element of the hardship fund. So we continuing to make claims on a monthly basis in relation to the additional expenditure that we're incurring. And as you'll see in table 2.2 of the report, the council has claimed 4.8 million for the period up until the end of August this year. And to date, £3 million has been received in relation to those claims. I can also update committee that since we wrote this report, the September claim has also gone in now, and that was for a further £1.9 million, which included 6 months worth of hotel accommodation in relation to the support that we're giving for homeless services at the minute. Financial support with regards to lost income is being made on a quarterly basis, and for the first quarter, as the report indicates, we claimed 324,000. The claim for the second quarter is due to go into Welsh Government tomorrow, but we're currently looking at that's going to be in excess of 150,000. So it is still fairly early in the financial year, so it's difficult to predict the potential outturn at this current point in time. However, you'll see in paragraph 2.8 of the report highlights the position based on our current projections for the year. And it's indicating that there may well be a requirement to draw down on reserves, in particular for two services, in social services and environment and housing. The details for each directorate are shown in the report. And obviously we will continue to monitor this position. In social care, there is pressures both for children's services and adult services. And in environment and housing, the main cost pressure is around waste services, which again, we will have reported to members previously. We have an efficiency target in this year's budget of £500,000. No efficiency targets were set for schools. That's all set for other services, and the services are currently working on identifying those. However, it's currently anticipated there may be a shortfall there of 170,000 by the end of the financial year. So the report details the position for service area for you, and we're asking committee to note the content of the report tonight. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Councillor Johnson and then Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Caris. We've seen these these overspends, I think, reported to us, as you say, on a number of occasions. I'm assuming that with regards to the social services, particularly children and young people, that these are Wales-wide pressures and that work is being undertaken at WLGA level to lobby Welsh Government to get additional funding for this. So I wonder if you could confirm that. But I'm probably more interested in the local overspend, as it were, on the waste management and also the CCTV contract funding, which are things that have been hanging around for quite some time, and there doesn't seem to be a sort of an end target for resolving these and bringing them back on track. I'm wondering if there is a sort of anticipated target, or if we're just kicking the can down the road on this again. Thanks.
Okay, shall I answer those now, Chair? Yeah.
Sorry, yes, please.
Okay, fine, thank you. Yes, first of all, in relation to children's services, you're absolutely correct. The pressures that we're experiencing in the Vale are being reflected right across Wales, and there is a considerable amount of lobbying being done across Wales in relation to that. So the Association of Directors of Social Services have written to Welsh Government in relation to this and are lobbying hard. The Society of Welsh Treasurers are currently putting together some figures with regards to what that pressure looks like across Wales, and are including it then through some of the WLGA submissions in relation to funding pressures going forward into the new year. So we're certainly not alone in relation to those pressures in children's services. And I think to say as well, they're not, whilst some are related to the pandemic, they're not going to end at the end of this financial year. They are going to, they are continuing. With regard to the other two more local ones, in relation to waste management, the service has just about finalised a business plan now, which is looking forward 10 years with regards to the cost of the service, highlighting the pressures and what they're doing to work as efficiently as they possibly can. My understanding is that's due to come into Cabinet before Christmas. And that does outline the current pressures, how they hope to develop the service, and then what they're trying to do to mitigate some of those costs. So you should see a written business plan coming through fairly soon in relation to waste management. And on CCTV as well, I understand discussions are now ongoing with the Police and Crime Commissioner around some of these issues. And I think meetings have taken place recently. So I understand they're hoping to be able to report more positively about how that's taken forward in the future.
Councillor Carroll now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Caris, for the report. It's just a quick one, really. Has any assessment been made of the potential impacts of inflation on revenue expenditure in the current financial year?
It's something we're monitoring. We're starting to see costs going up. The energy costs, they're not hitting us yet, but they will be hitting us. Where we're actually seeing inflation costs more at the moment are through the capital programme, which I'll come on to on the next agenda item. But it is something that we will keep an eye on with regards to how it's impacting on our accounts.
Perfect, thank you. I'm assuming in the next report it's probably likely to feature more prominently if those costs start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else got any comments? I don't see anyone indicate. Okay, I've got to make a comment then. I just wondering about the impact upon agency staff. I just wondering, are we getting them? because I've heard rumours that agency staff are very difficult to get hold of now, and also is the cost of hiring them rising as well?
I mean, I'm sure committee are aware, because you've had reports on this in the past, that we do use agency staff in some of our service areas, some of them seasonal, and some of them because there are recruitment hotspots in various parts of the council. We have recently, with regards to actually environmental and housing services, particularly in waste, taken on a number of agency staff as permanent staff. We've been able to offer them contracts, and they've been willing to come to work with us rather than in other areas. I'm thinking particularly of HGV drivers, because we're able to offer them permanent employment. And so I know that we've taken on a number of staff in that area. We've actually made them permanent as opposed to agency. I think we continue to have some hotspots in different parts of the authority where it's difficult to get permanent and agency staff. And I know that our HR colleagues are working with certain services in that area. Social care would be one at the current time where there is a real pressure point there in recruiting staff, and they're not able to get them through the agencies either at the moment.
Thank you very much. I mean, I thought as much because I know in other areas where I work for the college, I know we're having pressures of finding staff, not just in the usual sort of areas, but also in academic areas. Even for teaching, we're struggling to find staff at the moment. So I know it's becoming an increasing problem. And I'm just wondering, perhaps, could we also look at, I think lots of people don't understand or appreciate that you get a pension, that you get various benefits, be it working for local government or working for lots in the public sector. And I think perhaps maybe we need to promote this a little bit more to attract more people, especially from the private sector, because often the private sector doesn't offer those kind of benefits. So I think sometimes we need to do a bit more on that and emphasise that going forward, because I think this labour shortage is going to continue for a while until the market sorts itself out. So I think that's clearly something that I do think we need to perhaps emphasise more. And also the other question I was going to ask you, Caris, and I know we haven't got HR people with us, but I'm sure one or two people may be able to answer this, is what about redeployment as well? Redeployment opportunities for staff who may think, actually, I could be more usefully employed doing this or doing that, but you know what, no one's asked me. Or maybe I want a change in mid-career. And I just wonder, perhaps, do we do any of that? When we have reviews with staff, do we ask them? And obviously in a non-threatening way, because some people may feel threatened by such a question, and I can't understand why they would. But do we perhaps look for that as well, especially in areas where there are shortages? And also, can we incentivise that as well? I was just wondering about that as well.
I'm sure Tracy would be able to give you a much fuller answer than I can, but we do have a redeployment policy, and that's usually aimed at staff who, for whatever reason, can't continue to work in their current post. Either we've done a restructure and they're at risk, or people will be redeployed if they have a health reason, for instance, that makes it very difficult for them to continue in their current role. And then we do have a policy whereby we support them and we offer them trials in alternative posts where we've got other vacancies in the authority, and we obviously offer them training and support, so that if there is a skills gap between where they are now and what that other post would do, then we'll offer them the training and the support to try and make sure we don't lose any staff. With regards to, well, we have done repurposing as well over the last 18 months, which is where we've had particular pressure points in services as a result of COVID, and staff have either volunteered or been asked whether or not they'd like to redeploy into those areas, and the response from staff has been very positive, actually, and they've moved from their substantive roles into a repurposed service for a duration of time to help out. Does that answer your query?
Yeah, that does answer my question.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that. Got anyone else? So we now move on to the next item. Can we note that? Thank you. Move on to capital now. Capital monitoring.
Okay, fine. Thank you, Chair. So this is the capital monitoring for the same period. So it's up until the end of August this year. And the report outlines for you the position on the programme, and it also outlines for you actually the impact that the pandemic is having on the capital programme, both around delivery, but also going back to what Councillor Carroll was asking on the previous agenda item in relation to costs. So our current approved programme is detailed for you in Appendix 1. Current approved programme is 125 million. We're currently projecting an outturn against that of 106 million. There's a lot of detail in that report, but you'll see a particular note. I would sort of say that you can see that we've had some education grant which has been put in place and utilised in a number of schools, to enable them to mitigate and ensure the school environments are actually better placed in relation to being COVID-19 safe. So it's around ventilation and space within the schools. There's also a bit of a reprofiling of the Band B schemes within the 21st Century Schools programme. There's also the receipt of some integrated care fund monies to convert an existing property into an accessible bungalow and studio flat so that we can support people to live as independently as possible. You'll see in there reference to there's been financial impact on the waste transfer station scheme, which is obviously part of the longer term planning for our waste service. And I think that's one in particular where the impact of inflation and supply chain issues are having a significant impact on that scheme. And also you'll see that both of those things, Brexit and COVID-19 are also impacting on the housing capital programme this year, again in relation to the supply chain and in relation to some of the cost issues. And for that reason, there is some slippage outlined in the report for you around the housing programme for this year. So we will continue to monitor the programme, in particular bringing to your attention the impact of the pandemic and Brexit on the programme. And you'll see in Appendix 1 the detailed scheme by scheme account of what's in the programme and the current position on each scheme. So we're asking you tonight really to note the progress on the capital programme and to note all of the changes that have been made in the programme, whether they're by the use of delegated authority or emergency powers. Okay. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Yes, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman. Probably unsurprisingly for Keris, and start on the waste transfer station, because obviously that cost seems to have doubled from 3.6 million to 7.2 million, which is quite substantial, and for a variety of reasons. A lot of this, if I remember correctly, was involved a Welsh Government grant for this. Is there any way, given that there's a lot of this is coming from outside external influences, is there a way of claiming more grant, or is that stuck on when we have to deal with the rest of that? Just also two quick other points. One is that I think it's paragraph 2.32 is about neighbourhood services buildings regarding compliance issues in community centres. I'm just interested as to whether there's a policy regarding contributions from the community centres for which the work is done, or if there's how that was determined, what contribution should be made by the community centres, and also just welcome the putting money towards bids for barrier regeneration projects next year. But actually the waste transfer station question I think is the most important one there. Thank you.
Okay. In relation to the waste transfer station, you're absolutely right. There's a whole raft of issues that are currently impacting on that scheme. The significant ones are around the supply chain and then the costs involved with all of that. We have had significant Welsh Government grant funding in previous years to support us with rolling out the blueprint and to buy the equipment and things that we need to do. We have gone back to Welsh Government on this one to request additional support because these increased costs are out of our control, really, and they are significant, as you said when you started your question, really. We will continue to ask them for that funding. As yet, no further funding has come forward to support us, but obviously that is a significant cost, and the development of the waste transfer station is an integral part of our service development issues for the waste service, really, and as support us with the further rollout of the blueprint. So we've gone back to Welsh Government on those grounds, really, to see whether or not there's any support coming forward. As yet, we've not had anything, but we keep trying. Yeah.
Can
Does that
I-
answer?
the answers, but obviously it's a, well, we don't know at the moment, isn't an answer.
No.
You spoke earlier about 10-year business plan. I mean, to what extent is, we got was it £1.5 million overspend this year? We obviously struggled with last year and probably the year before as well. I'm seeing something that's been in the pipeline for a while. With doubling its cost is simply quite huge. Can't say anything more than that.
Well, I think all I would say is two things to that really, is that we're closely managing that to make sure that the contractor can evidence these increased costs, to make sure that we can manage them as best we can. So we will manage that scheme very, very closely. And obviously the spend on the capital, the intention is that will impact on our revenue budget in the longer term, because this is about reducing some of those travelling costs that we've got inbuilt into the service currently. So the completion of the capital scheme, you should see coming through in the business account, as in the business plan, as reducing our revenue cost as we go forward. So they are intrinsically linked, really. In relation to the compliance issue in the community centre, am I all right to carry on to the next agenda item? Is the next question rather? Is that all right? Yeah. In relation to I'm not sure that we have a policy with regards to how we determine how much community centre should make us by way of a contribution. But what I will do is go away and check that and let you know. Yeah.
Okay, can I just intervene on that? I'm going to declare an interest because I am a management trustee of Glyndon Community Centre. So I'm secretary of it, and I think, that's the sort of question that, obviously it'd be interesting, but I would not participate in any discussion with that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on now to Councillor John.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quickie. I notice the Welsh Government have given a grant to allotment support grant. I thought we were negotiating with town councils to take over our allotments. Carys, has that gone by the board now, has it? Because this was part of the reshaping originally.
That's a good question, and I must admit, off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that. Whether or not it's one of the things that has fallen a bit behind as a result of our response to COVID. But I will check that for you, and I'll come back to you on that if that's all right.
Yeah, fine. I was really interested in that because obviously Landshut Major run their own allotments, but I do realise that going back down the line, we were talking about working with other town councils to take over our allotments, and I noticed that figure's been put in. Thank you, Carys, very much.
Okay, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question in relation to the residential parking schemes. Can be found at paragraph 2.28 of the report. There's reference to the anticipated cost being £75,000. Is that for all of the schemes mentioned in that paragraph? I'm just conscious that the Landoc scheme has yet to be agreed on that. I'm assuming that the 75,000 includes schemes that haven't yet gone ahead as well.
Yeah. Yes, it's the whole lot. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I've got no one else indicating. So can I thank you all, and can we happy to note those recommendations and those changes. Okay, we now go on to the next item on the agenda, which is Audit Wales Financial Sustainability Assessment available from Council. Carrie, so I know we got auditors here as well from Audit Wales.
I was going to say, Chair, I know that there are colleagues here from Audit Wales who I think are probably going to present this report to you and their findings.
So is Ian and Steve going to present this together? Wonderful.
Yeah, yes, Chair.
Yeah.
I'll kick things off here. We're doing this as a double-handed session, so to speak. So, but I'll commence proceedings if you like. So, thank you. But my input here is just to say a few words, really, by way of introduction, but also to refer to the national report. So I think that provides some useful context, because after all, this work was undertaken as part of a piece of work we were undertaking across all 22 councils in Wales, which we undertook during 2021, including the Vale. So I think it's, you know, interesting and important, I guess, to refer to that national context. But this work, which again was consistent across all the 22 councils in Wales, looked at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on financial sustainability, the financial strategies of each of the councils, the reserves position of each of the councils, how councils have performed against budget, the achievement of savings plans, and also liquidity issues. As I said, we looked at this at all councils across Wales, and this national report reflects those high-level findings. I don't want to go through the report in any great detail, but the link is in your papers there. But I thought it'd be interesting and maybe worthwhile just to talk about refer to some of what I perceive as some of the key findings of that report. And basically, there's three in particular messages I'd like to convey from that report. The first thing is, you know, we found that over the course of the year, extra short-term funding from Welsh Government was very helpful and supportive to the sector, you know, the local government sector. However, you know, it's the inevitable issue, really, isn't it? Longer-term challenges and uncertainties do remain. You know, which Carys touched on some of those issues really as part of the revenue monitoring agenda item. So that's sort of brought it alive, hopefully to some extent. Two other messages from the national report. One is the level of reserves is mixed across Wales. No, that wouldn't surprise you, but obviously that's obviously going to influence then how councils can meet those challenges. And thirdly, we found that some councils showed significant and overspent in some areas. And the interesting thing here was those overspends, well, I say interesting, it may not be a surprise, have occurred in very similar areas, such as social services. The national report closes by talking about some areas, some key areas where councils can target their efforts to improve financial sustainability. And this part of the report is probably the bit that's probably most of relevance to yourselves at the Vale. But those four areas, again, it's not rocket science in many ways. It's just reiterating some of the key messages, I guess. But those four areas are the need for clear financial planning, including identifying now how funding gaps will be addressed. Secondly, the plan and agree an approach regarding the best use of reserves, and included in this is making best use of reserves to help fund investor save initiatives, because obviously the use of reserves is not sustainable as a long-term solution, is it, to breach any funding gap. The third area that's identified is the need to set realistic budgets for service areas as far as that is possible. And fourthly is the need to ensure that savings plans are realistic and achievable. The four areas sort of flagged within the report as areas to target to improve and enhance financial sustainability. As stated, I don't want to go through the report in any great detail. I don't want to reiterate everything that's in there. So I'll stop there at the moment and hand you over to Ian, who can provide a bit more of a local flavour in terms of the findings from our local work at the Vale of Glamorgan Council.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I noticed there's a hand up. I don't know if leave it up to the chair whether we take the question now or
I think we can do that later while you've done yours, Ian.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, just going to take you through the local report. We finalised this report in August this year, so the figures were correct at that point in time. Our overall finding is that the council is well placed to maintain its financial resilience with a healthy level of reserves and sustainable plans for their use. There's a table on page 7 of the report that sets out the costs of the council of COVID over 2021. The majority of the council's additional spend and lost income as a result of COVID was covered by Welsh Government funding. However, the report recognises there's a great deal of uncertainty about the duration of the pandemic and the extent of future Welsh Government funding for costs arising from it. With regard to strategic financial planning, we found the council's in a healthy financial position and has a sustainable financial approach over the medium term, with a planned use of earmarked reserves. The medium-term financial plan does project a £10.435 million budget gap over the next 3 years, and does not explicitly set out how it will meet this gap over that period. However, we do note the council is in a healthy financial position and has various options at its disposal to meet those gaps, such as its healthy level of reserves and the fact its current rate of council tax is below the Welsh average. With regards to reserves, we found the council, as I say, healthy level of reserves, and plans to use them are generally sustainable, despite some unplanned use in 2021. There's projected to be a 48% fall in the council's level of reserves in the period up to the 31st of March 2024. However, this is mainly in respect to the planned use of earmarked reserves, and the council considers that the level of reserves in this period will be adequate, and the council intends to maintain its general reserves above the minimum recommended by the Section 151 officer. With regard to performance against budget, the council has a track record of achieving a surplus and transferring monies to its reserves, up until 2021, when service overspends led to a small unplanned use of reserves. Between 2016-17 and 2019-20, the council achieved a surplus each year and transferred money to its reserves. For 2021, there was unplanned drawdown of reserves totaling £700,000. With regard to savings delivery, we concluded that the council has a mixed track record of identifying and delivering savings to support its financial sustainability. Our financial sustainability report for the council last year found that the council has not achieved its recent savings targets. In 2021, the council significantly reduced its savings targets to 247,000. It's again set a low savings target for 21-22 of £500,000, which actually increased from an original target of £116,000. There was a report to Cabinet in February this year that set out that there's a possible shortfall in funding for 2023 and 23-24, totaling £9.935 million. And that report acknowledges that savings targets to contribute to meeting this shortfall is becoming more challenging, and the work remains to be done in order to identify efficiencies for those years. Our report contains one proposal for improvement, and it relates to this point. The proposal for improvement is that given the anticipated funding gaps in 2022 to 23 and 23 to 24, the council needs to determine how it will meet those gaps, including the extent to which savings will contribute to that. Finally, with regard to the council's liquidity position, we found that the council has a strong liquidity position, meaning it can meet its financial obligations as they fall due for repayment. Those are the main messages in the local report. Steve and I will be happy to take any questions you might have. Thanks.
People on that. Okay, I got three councillors so far. No doubt there may be a couple more. So the first one is Councillor John. Your question.
I left my light on, Chairman, from the previous one. Sorry.
That's okay, no worries. And Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Steve and Ian for the presentation and for the report. Like several of us on this committee also sit on the Governance and Audit Committee, and we've had sort of discussions about this, and we have a lot of discussions around these topics in full council as well. So I think in many respects, the pleasant thing about this report is that I don't see any surprises in here or anything that we have really completely missed as a council, in terms of our scrutiny and our audit. So I think it's a refreshing and transparent look at this. There's a couple of points I just want to pick up, which are maybe the tension between audit and sort of experience. I'm coming to the end of my second term as a councillor here, and some of the issues that you are raising are things that we have discussed on many occasions here. So I think, for example, that we have for at least the last 3 years for which we have figures, and we have the highest percentage of usable reserves, which is a discussion that we've regularly had, of the 22 local authorities. We've had discussions about, sort of almost the not quite the level of risk, that's probably the wrong phrase, but certainly the way in which our figures are developed. So there's concern raised by yourselves or discussion by yourselves about the planned use of reserves and the extent at which they will be spent over coming years. If I look back to figures I was given in 2013, they would suggest that by 2017-18 we would be struggling with our reserves. Actually, we had similar amounts. So the figures that are presented within our paperwork are not necessarily those which transpire when we look at the figures 4 or 5 years later. As you see, actually, our level of reserves has remained consistently high and increased over periods of time, rather than decreased to the extent which was presented in figures to councillors. Similarly, the proposal for improvements is based around figures which suggest that there will be a 0% increase in in government support, for example. I'm not sure how, we've often utilised sort of that highly fiscally conservative figure, but recent years increases of the AEF from Welsh Government have been closer to 5% rather than 0%. And so we're almost setting ourselves up for a bit of a fall, I think, in suggesting there will be no increase in Welsh Government. As a council, we've had one of the highest completion rates of properties in the last couple of years, and that has started to feed its way through into the funding formula and the aggregated external funding that comes from Welsh Government to us. So I'm a little concerned that we would start setting out highly complicated savings proposals for something that actually isn't necessary, because that money will come through other sources. If I'm being unclear, I'm happy to sort of try and clarify this, sort of afterwards for Ian and Steve. I do have one particular question, I'd like, which is Exhibit 8, which is right at the end, page 15, which is about a comparison of assets, liabilities, and working capital ratios. This shows quite a substantial increase for 2020-21 compared to previous years. I'm just looking for clarification as to whether that's just considered a COVID blip, and obviously it'll take some time for some of the COVID impacts to be seen through all of the different council publications, or whether those current liabilities are also taken into consideration changes as a result of our house building programme. Similarly, what I wouldn't want to see is a situation where we look like we're being penalised and having lower working capital ratios when we've also got a 30-year housing development programme in place, which presumably is signed off and supported by the people that it should be. So there's a couple of comments there on the wider report. Like I say, I think it tells us things that we've already looked at, which is good, because I think it's good to have no major surprises. And I think that's very useful to see in the wider context of Welsh local authorities and COVID. So thank you very much. Okay,
Councillor, we'll do a series of comments, observations, then you guys can respond if that's okay. So Councillor Carroll, please, next. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question in relation to reserves. I note in section 9 of the report, a recommended minimum level of reserves is set at £10 million. Obviously, that's an internal figure set by the authority. I would just be keen to know what Audit Wales' view would be on that figure and what your recommended minimum would be.
Okay. Anyone else before I make some comments? Okay, I'm going to make some comments now as well. I mean, our reserves are high, but we need to look at context. And I think that's what we need a bit more work on here, is context. I mean, you've got to think about all different councils are different. Some councils have a lot of assets they can liquidate and convert into cash. And really, that is something that does need to be looked at in terms of context. Some councils can do that, some can't. So if you look at, say, for instance, a neighbouring authority, one of the larger councils in Wales has got lots of assets and it could convert it. But admittedly, probably their reserves are not as high as us. So it's all about context is so important here. The second thing is I was going to ask you a question, a technical question. I know you noticed you did the working capital ratio, which I think also known as the current ratio. I just wondered about the quick ratio, also known as the acid test. And have you got any data with reference to that? Because I think that's a truer reflection of liquidity rather than looking at the current ratio, the working capital ratio, as you described it, because that normally is a more conservative figure rather than the inflated figure of the current ratio, which you tend to use, which I find interesting that you're using it, but I think some of that may not be realizable, you know, and I know admittedly we probably don't have huge amount of stock figures, but nevertheless that is something to consider as well. And I just wondered why you only use that ratio. Why didn't you look at other ratios as well? So I'd be interested for your thoughts on that, and also about your remit. So how you constructed your remit as well, and why you look at certain indicators and not other indicators, like asset base, for example. So those are my questions. Okay, I haven't got anyone else asking questions, so I look forward to your comments. Stephen, Ian on those.
Thank you, Chair. I'll kick. There's a number of. I'll work backwards if I may. In terms of the liquidity ratio, Chair, the basis we've used here is when we wanted to be consistent across all 22 councils. So the basis we used is what was selected by the the project team who undertaken that work. So we didn't undertake any other type of ratio analysis, admittedly, but what I will do is take your message back, and if we do any subsequent work on liquidity, we can sort of factor in potentially, or at least consider other basis of measuring liquidity. So that's all I can say on that point. I'm sorry. Going in regard to your question, Councillor Carroll, the minimum level of reserves, yes, it is locally set at £10 million, and this is very much, to be perfectly honest, a matter for local judgment. We haven't, within Audit Wales, established what we perceive to be a minimum level, albeit if we did believe there was a minimum level, we would be making, we would be reporting that to you if we thought that minimum level wasn't sufficient or not. I think the point you made, Chair, is quite pertinent here. It will depend, wouldn't it, whether a minimum level is sufficient or not. For example, if there's a track record of always achieving overspends against your budget, if there's a track record of not achieving savings plans, that minimum level is vulnerable, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I think the context, as you put it quite neatly there, is a key factor here. And Councillor Johnson, I'm trying to think what your question was. It was about the liquidity ratio, wasn't it? I'm sorry, in regard to Exhibit 8. You made some good, observations. But the liquidity ratio, I'm not sure if I'm well placed to answer that. I'm not sure, was that a question more of the detail behind it? Was that a question of Caris, or was it a question of us? Sorry, I couldn't quite.
I think I'm interested in. There's I mean, 2020. It's the spike that's in the last financial year, where there's an increase in both the assets and the liabilities, quite a substantial increase in liabilities on previous years, and I was looking to establish whether that was a sort of a COVID based impact, or whether that was related to our ongoing council house building programme, or whether it was something else entirely, because just that 17 million increase there's an increase of £14 million in the assets and an increase of £17 million in the liabilities, and that has a fairly substantial impact on the working capital ratio. So I was looking to understand what the underlying causes of that were. I'm
not sure if Caris wants to comment on that, but what I would say is this each of these years, though, is just a snapshot in time, as I'm sure you're well known, based on the balance sheet information. So it is like a snapshot of the position as at the 31st of March. So there could be various factors influencing that. And the other thing I will say is that we had no concerns in regard to liquidity. In fact, the Vale was one of the most, what's the word? It ranked amongst the top. Yeah, I think that's quite appropriate. But in terms of the liquidity ratio measurement, the Vale ranked amongst one of the highest councils in the whole of Wales. So there's no alarm bells ringing here, so to speak.
Sorry, I just wanted to go on back to Councillor Wilson's point about the. Sorry for interrupting you, Councillor Johnson. It was just a point about how we constructed the remit and what we were looking at. It's Steve mentioned there was a central project team who were kind of coordinating the project across the 22 councils, but there was also a lot of engagement with the Society of Welsh Treasurers in terms of what areas would be useful to look at and how we'd look at that. But as Steve said, we can take your point back about the actual liquidity ratio point you made. Sorry, Councillor Johnson.
No problem. Sorry, Ian. I think the other point I was making that I'd like I don't know if it's a response from yourselves at Audit Wales or from Caris. It's about the proposal for improvements, because it feels to me, as a member of the local authority, member of this committee, the CPR committee, member of the Governance and Audit Committee, it feels a little to me that we've made our own prison on this. Because the figure of 10.5 million or so is needing to be found is predicated on there being 0% increase in Welsh Government AEF funding and AEF. That's it's one thing to sit there and say, oh, if there's zero change, then we will have a problem. But the funding formula in the recent years has brought us between 4 and 5%, whereas we've been, sort of developing these, reports on the basis of there being 0% or even, minus 1% or plus 1%. It just feels to me, I'm just interested how we will be dealing with that from our side as a proposal for improvement, because, as I say, it feels that we're actually trapping ourselves into, to generating a set of figures or explanations for what would be cut or what would be saved, etc. When actually that is the sort of thing that doesn't necessarily transpire in that way. Thanks.
I would say on that the Vale certainly aren't an outlier in respect of their future projections. So I think it's minus 1% cash flat, 0, and plus 1%. In fact, there's another council I'm aware of where we've made a proposal for improvement that their projections are perhaps too optimistic, and they should plan as well for more negative settlements in future. You just think, you can't predict what will happen, and there's talk of no return to austerity, but there is still those huge pressures going forward and potential for not as favourable settlements as the last couple of years. So I think going back to that other council, we felt it would be more prudent if they actually predicated things going forward on a cash flow or even a negative, and the Vale are quite similar to a lot of other councils in how they project. So for us, that it's a prudent approach. That okay, the last couple of years, there has been more favourable settlements, but I don't think necessarily going forward that we'll see that to the same extent. But Caris might want to come in as well.
Caris, do you want to come in at all on anything?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in on that last point, Chair. I mean, I think, as Ian said, we usually model across 3 options, don't we, on the AEF? -1, flat rate, +1. I know you said that the settlements have been good in the last couple of years, and they have. But when we had that first good one, that was quite a surprise. Actually, nobody was predicting an increase in the AEF at that level. And again, for this year, really, I mean, we will look at our modelling. We also, as you know, we model at different levels of council tax as well to try and get the best idea of what we're doing. I think it's been raised a couple of times tonight that actually the Vale is doing very well on the formula at the moment, predominantly because of the population increase in the area, and that is it is swinging in our favour. But at the end of the day, it's about how much money is in that pot to come out to local government in the first place. So we get an allocation of that, obviously, but if the overall pot goes up, we're benefiting. We don't know what's going to happen to that pot going forward. And I guess that's the two sides of that, isn't it? It's our proportion of the pot and actually how big that pot is going to be in the first place. And I think Ian used the word, we probably do tend to be prudent in our forward planning. In the last couple of years, the AEF has been quite different to what we'd expected. Obviously, we do what we can to keep our eyes and ears open with regards to what we think is going to happen with the settlement. But at the end of the day, we do have a tendency to go on a more of a prudent approach to it. But I'm pleased to hear what Ian said, which is that we're not an outlier in relation to that with regards to our forward planning.
Okay, can I thank you all for this report? And I think it's a very positive report. I mean, the Vale being the best or the second best authority in terms of things like working capital ratio is to be applauded, given the concerns that we have going forward. We have inflation going up to 3.1%. We have an economy where labour is at severe shortage. There's going to be huge cost pressures, and we're a much better place than most councils to bear that. And I think that is one important consideration. So I think we're well placed to deal with it. And I'm glad that we are prudent and sensible. I think that's paid off in lots of ways. And fortunately, we've had some good windfalls. But have you seen the news recently about the deficit? We've had the monthly deficit, a huge monthly deficit. Our cumulative deficit is now £2.2 trillion. It's scary times. Very scary times. We have to go back almost to the Second World War to see those sort of figures. And it's really, really grim. So, you know, we've got to be prepared for the times which could be much harder than they are at the moment. So I think we're right to be sensible, we're right to be prudent. And can I also applaud Caris and the team and the Audit Wells for doing this? Because I think, you know, Caris and the team in particular have done superb over the last several years that I've known them. And clearly this is a way forward. And we are well placed to deal with any sort of crisis, unlike some other councils. And that's all due to the hard work of the team in putting that together. And can I thank you all very much? And can I also note our comments go forward to the audit committee, and that is based on recommendation 1 and recommendation 2. I've got no other comments made. Can we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is scrutiny, decision tracking, recommendation and update work programme. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. This is familiar. This report is familiar to members. This report is the second quarter referring members to the recommendations that they've previously made, requesting your agreement with the progress that's been detailed in Appendices A and B. It's a twofold report. It relates to your recommendations and also an updated forward work programme. If I can firstly refer to Appendix A and B, the uncompleted recommendations I've referred to as completed in the document, with all the progress that is detailed throughout that report. If you're happy as committee to accept that progress, then obviously I will record them as completed. But if there are any issues you'd like to raise, then please do so, and we can make any changes.
Open to committee. Has anyone got any comments? Are we happy to note they're completed? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In regards to Appendix B then, Chair, this is the forward work programme for the committee. And again, you will see that I've listed there what is coming forward over the next few months, having considered the Cabinet forward work programme that recently went to Cabinet a couple of weeks back. And I've identified there what's going to be coming to this committee. Obviously, any further reports of this committee have requested will also be included. But I would like to bring attention for members' agreement tonight in relation to page 15, which looks at other reports that are due to be submitted to the committee. Going forward, again, I have listed the commentary there, and I would ask for committee's agreement with the commentary. However, there are a couple of items that I have suggested that will be removed from the list for various reasons. There is also an item in relation to the contact centre that has been listed for November 21, and I just want to bring that to your attention. And again, the last item on that report on page 15 under reports, just before we talk about annual reports, relates to a previous recommendation of this committee that a report on the comparison of income derived from football over recent years be presented. The commentary there refers to the fact this has been impacted by COVID, and due to the exceptional year in which much organised activity was not possible, undertaking this exercise for the 2021 year was not feasible. However, this could be progressed retrospectively should members consider it useful. So I'm just highlighting those there for members to consider how they want to progress going forward. If they're happy to delete that item from there based on the commentary, all well and good. And if they're also happy to accept all the comments that I've placed on that document as well, it's over to members for their views, please.
Okay, open to any member on these? Okay, I'm just going to say on the report on comparative income derived from footfall, are we happy to progress that or not? What's your view? I think we're happy to progress that. Yes, we are. Okay, so if we could progress that, that would be useful. So if we can schedule that up until obviously the end of this council, that would be helpful rather than earlier and later. Okay, thank you. I think that's it. And can I thank you all for your forbearance? I think we've done it under an hour, that's pretty good. And can I thank you all for turning up? And I'll see you at the next meeting.
Chair, can I just clarify then in relation to the other reports, my commentary that I've listed, you're accepting?
Yes. Okay,
Lovely.
we're happy with that? Yep.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I've got no other item under part 1, no part 2. Can I thank you and good night, everyone.